Good afternoon. I want to welcome you to another edition of Introduction to Christian Apologetics. In this lecture, we're going to be looking at Norman Geisler's book, When Skeptics Ask. And last week in class, we went over chapter 1 and the introduction. This week, we're looking at chapter 2, and we may get into chapter 3 as well. Again, the book by Norman Geisler, and he also had some help with that book. Ronald M. Brooks, When Skeptics Ask. Okay, so chapter 2 is about questions about God. And he says the existence of a personal moral God is fundamental to all that Christians believe. The existence of a personal moral God is fundamental to all that Christians believe. If there is no moral God, there is no moral being against whom we have sinned, therefore salvation is not needed. So we know that there is a moral God. He sent his son into the world, Jesus Christ, to save sinners. And we remember that especially at this time of the year when people all over the world celebrate Easter, the resurrection of Jesus Christ. So notice a few arguments for the existence of God. And I would encourage you, you can do further research and study on these. The C.S. Lewis Institute online has a number of topics and lectures on these different arguments for the existence of God, and these are well known. So the first one is the cosmological argument. The cosmological argument is the argument from the contingent, changing world, the cosmos, to the existence of God, who is a necessary being. Okay, so we know that we are dependent upon God. We, like all the rest of creation, are dependent upon Him, and that's exactly what Scripture teaches. What Scripture teaches is what we actually find within ourselves and we find within the natural world. So the cosmological argument, again, we're just going to go through these briefly so that you have whet your taste, your appetite to know what these arguments are. Cosmological argument, the argument from the contingent, changing world, the cosmos, to the existence of God. Why is there something instead of nothing? Because in the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. Colossians 1:16 and 17 say that Jesus Christ created all that we see, that it is for Him, it is by Him, and He sustains all things. And I would refer you to those texts, Genesis 1:1, and then also Colossians chapter 1, verses 16 and 17. So notice the teleological argument. The teleological argument is the argument from design to the existence of a designer, God. So we look at the world, we see in every species, we see incredible design. You look at the human eye, incredible design. The human ear, the human brain. And we don't even have to get outside of the human being to see unbelievable complexity that we could never reproduce. Yes, you say, well, a computer, we can create AI and all this, but you're using the blueprint that the Creator made, and you'll never make a being like a human being. It will still be a machine that is simply a machine that can simply be turned off. So the machines were not created in the image and likeness of God. So the argument from design to the existence of a designer, and that would be God. It's ironic that so many who don't believe in God will go through the art museums, and you'll see Picasso, you'll see Renoir, you'll see Degas, even Jackson Pollock, the modern artist who dripped paint all over the canvas and thought that he was going to prove that the universe was just random chance without a God. And his work was anything but random. When you look at it, he can't get away from design and patterns because God created the universe with design and with patterns and with meaning. So again, we can look at the art museums and, would you ever hear anyone say, when they look at a complex painting in a museum. Well, that was just the paint and the paintbrushes that came together and randomly formed this beautiful work of art. No one would take anyone seriously that said that. I spent basically 7 years in art school, and everything that has been designed or painted, it had a designer behind it. It had a painter behind it. It had a sculptor behind it. It had a lithographer behind it. It had a photographer behind it. So we see that in the natural realm, but people like to be just plain silly and say that the universe and the human race and the animals and everything in the cosmos just willy-nilly came into existence on its own. You've probably heard this before. If you give a group of gorillas or apes a computer and give them essentially unlimited time, some would say, oh, well, they'll create a great masterpiece. No, they won't. They defecate all over the keyboard, and they punch the letter S multiple times because these tests have been proven. They don't produce anything that's recognizable, let alone anything that would be considered complex and a work of art. So we understand that these silly atheistic assumptions about reality, again, they're just silly assumptions. So all the evidence points to a creative, intelligent, supreme being known as God. So the cosmological argument, the argument from the contingent, changing world, the cosmos, to the existence of God. The teleological argument, the argument from design to the existence of a grand designer, which would be God. The axiological argument, that's the argument from the moral law. The axiological argument, the argument from the moral law to a moral lawgiver. If universal law exists, then there must be a divine moral lawgiver. So C.S. Lewis begins Mere Christianity with this illustration about why is it that we feel that injustice has been done when someone takes our seat, like on the bus, or if we're driving, we could say someone takes our parking spot at the supermarket. But when we take the spot or the seat, we feel that we're justified. As Lewis says, the fact that we feel slighted points to the fact that there is a moral law. And if there's a moral law, then there is a moral lawgiver. So notice number 4, the ontological argument. The ontological argument. This is the argument that if we have being, right, we move and have our being, there must be a supreme being. Created by Anselm for God's existence, he claimed that from our idea of God's existence, his being, that we can conclude that God must exist. So the fact that we exist, the fact that we have our being, means that there is a higher being, as Plato would have believed as well, where the eternal forms came from, that we see replicated in the natural world. The ontological argument, the argument that we have being, and that there must be a supreme being. Okay, so notice arguments from creation. This would be the cosmological argument, arguments from creation that we just touched on a moment ago. So there is a creation that exists that was caused by something beyond itself. There is a creation that exists that was caused by something beyond itself. The Apostle Paul states in Romans 1:19 that humans know about God and are therefore without excuse if they deny his existence. And again, that's in Romans 1, verse 19. Now, he gives us 2 forms of the arguments for God's existence from creation. Number 1, the universe was caused at the beginning. Number 1, the universe was caused at the beginning. The universe had a beginning. Anything that has a beginning must have been caused by something else. And the universe was caused by something else, and this cause was God. Okay? So 2 forms of the argument for God's existence from creation itself, that the universe was caused at the beginning. That's what the Bible teaches. In the beginning was the heaven. In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. Okay, he didn't do it in the middle. He didn't do it at the end. He did it at the beginning. Okay, in the beginning, God created. That's why it's called Genesis. Genesis means beginning. So the universe had a beginning. Anything that has a beginning must have been caused by something else, and the universe was caused by something else, and that cause was God himself. Now, atomists or physicalists, also known as atheistic naturalists, okay, atomists, they just believe in a collection of atoms that form things. They're also called physicalists. All that exists is physical material matter. And then atheistic naturalists try to get around this by claiming that the universe is eternal, okay? Now, we know, even though the Big Bang is not necessarily good science, that the Big Bang basically states that there was a beginning. The physicalists and the atomists and the naturalists are trying to get around that by claiming that the universe has always been here. Carl Sagan, using Trinitarian language, and Carl Sagan was the famous atheist who taught at Cornell. Carl Sagan, using Trinitarian language, ascribes deity to creation and not God when he said, the cosmos is all that is, or ever was, or ever will be. Okay, that's atheist. I don't think he's an atheist now because he's departed. He has met his maker. I don't believe Carl Sagan, the famous atheist, is an atheist now, because Scripture says that every tongue will confess, every knee will bow, that Jesus Christ is Lord, to the glory of God the Father. So Sagan did say, though, that the cosmos is all that is, or ever was, or ever will be. Sagan's view also goes by other names like the steady state theory, which says that the universe is constantly producing hydrogen atoms from nothing. And as Geisler points out, it would be simpler to believe that God created the universe from nothing. It would be simpler to believe that God created the universe from nothing, instead of holding to the steady state theory, which says that the universe is constantly producing hydrogen atoms from nothing. Geisler also goes on to say that the consensus of scientists studying the origins of the universe is that it came into being in a sudden and cataclysmic way. And many call that the Big Bang. Again, I don't know that the Big Bang is thoroughly good science and that it would fit into what God did in Genesis, but it does insist on a beginning. So Sagan and other atheists, physicalists, and naturalists and atomists were trying to get around the idea that the universe had a beginning by saying the universe was eternal. We know that is not the case. Okay, so moving down, primary evidence for the universe having a beginning is the second law of thermodynamics, okay? A primary evidence for the universe having a beginning is the second law of thermodynamics, which states that the universe is running out of stable energy. The universe is much like a coffee cup. Think about when you first make your coffee, it's hot. You go off in your house or in your study or wherever, and you're drinking your coffee, and you set it down and you start working. And within 5 minutes, 10 minutes, about 10 minutes, it's just cold. So then what do? You go downstairs, you put it in the microwave, or you heat it up on something, and you get it hot again, you bring it back up. What's it do? It goes from hot and then it cools down. Well, the second law of thermodynamics has taught us that the universe is running out of stable energy. The universe is much like a cup of coffee that starts out hot and then gradually cools off. So we find that the universe has a built-in expiration date. This was not a flaw in the creation, but this was built in. It was designed by God this way. You could say it was a result of the fall of Adam and Eve. It was a part of sin and death and destruction that would come upon the universe itself as a result of sin entering it. But there's hope, because Romans chapter 8 states that there's going to be a recreation of the present heavens and earth. There's going to be a new heaven and new earth and a new, what's called the New Jerusalem. It's all recorded in the book of Genesis chapter 21. So the universe was caused at the beginning. And notice, secondly, the universe needs a cause for its continuing existence. The universe needs a cause for its continuing existence, okay? So again, I want to refer you to Genesis chapter 1. We're not going to read it, but in the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. And then Colossians 1, 16 and 17 that speak of Jesus Christ being the one that created at the Father's command as part of the divine Trinity. And we know that he created all things and that he sustains all things, and all things are by his power and for his glory. So if every knee is going to bow and every tongue is going to confess Jesus as Lord, then that means everyone is the servant of God. You are the servant of Christ, whether you know it or not. You're either doing good for his glory or you're doing wicked against his kingdom. But it will all bring him glory. And again, everyone will bow the knee. Jesus is Lord, and we will all find that ultimately in the end. Many of us have found it now as Christians. We have been called into relationship with God, and we willingly serve him with the gifts that we have been given. And it is a true joy. It is our greatest joy to be Christians, to know Jesus Christ, to be forgiven by the triune God, and to offer up ourselves as living sacrifices with the gifts that we've been given for his glory. So we urge and appeal you to call upon Jesus Christ, the Lord of glory, the Lord of all, the Lord of your life. We pray that you will call upon him and that he will be the Lord of your heart willfully. So we find here the universe needs a cause for its continuing existence. Finite changing things exist. Okay, finite changing things exist. Finite changing things must be caused by something else, and there cannot be an infinite regress of these causes. There must be a first uncaused cause of every finite changing thing that exists. Okay, I want you to think about that. There must be a first uncaused cause of every finite changing thing that exists. You see, God is the uncaused cause. God was not created. Okay, to say who created God is what is called a philosophical, it's a categorical fallacy. It is a categorical fallacy to say who created God, because God is an uncaused cause. Okay, he's the only uncaused cause. He is the only necessary being in the universe. The universe wouldn't exist without his creation. I mean, it wouldn't exist without his being, right? We can cease to exist because we really had nothing to do with this. Now think about it. The life that you've been given, whether you're a Christian or an atheist or non-religious or whatever you are, you have made some kind of impact on the world through the good things you've done, even through the bad things, the sins that you've committed, right? Perhaps you have a degree. Maybe you went to trade school. Maybe you're a plumber. Maybe you're a doctor. Maybe you work at a plant. You are a chemist. You work at a restaurant. You're a chef. So you are contributing, hopefully in some ways, whether you're a believer or not, to the good of society, right? And so we could say that if you had not been there, that meal would not have been cooked, right? If you had not been there, your child would not have had clean clothes and food to eat, and they wouldn't have made it to school on time, right? So you've had an impact, right? So if you think about God, he is the uncaused cause of every finite changing thing in this universe. Well, in many ways, we're like that too, but we are contingent beings. We are dependent upon God, who is the necessary being. Does that make sense? So really, in many ways, God is replicating what is in his own nature within us as human beings, but he wasn't caused like we were. We were brought into existence. God is the uncaused cause. There would be no finite changing things like us if there had not been God himself the uncaused cause. So there are two aspects of creation. There's originating cause and there's continuing cause. Originating cause would be the beginning. God in the beginning. Originating cause. What would be the continuing cause? What enables things to continue on? Well, because God is ongoing. God is overseeing the world. And what we're going to see in our next lecture when we look at views on God, and I know we touched on this earlier on in James Sire's book, The Universe Next Door, we're going to see that God is not, deism is not the correct view of God. God did not just wind up the universe like a big clock and then step back from it as if he were disinterested. No, God is intimately interested in you, in his creation, right? So we understand there's originating cause, which is God at the beginning, and there's continuing cause. God is ever present in his world. And we see this in medieval paintings where the sky is open and there is God, there's Jesus, and there are angels, and they're ascending and descending upon the earth. Why? Because they're this ongoing, continuing cause. God is interested in his creation, and he is continually involved with us here, right? So we find that in the Enlightenment period, which was no enlightenment at all it did was close the box. It closed the sky, and it was a closed system. And in the paintings in the Enlightenment, unless they were done by Christians, there was a closed system where God was not involved in his creation, although he still was. But now, and during the Enlightenment period, they just closed things off to what they could discover empirically through reason without including God in the equation. So it really went from rational to irrational. So arguments for the existence of God, we just looked a little further at the cosmological. Notice the teleological. Arguments for the existence of God from design. Okay, that was the second one we looked at in our just quick review in the beginning. So the teleological. So all design implies a creator. And this is true. All design implies a creator. Okay. Even the art school student that I was friends with, that I knew when I was in art school, in visual art school at the Art Academy in Cincinnati, worked all night on a painting, didn't like it, kind of got irritated with it, smeared it, threw it in the corner, woke up the next day and had to take something to school or didn't want to get an F on the thing. So she took it in, the painting, and she ended up getting an A on it. Okay, so, but even though that was somewhat of a random act, her smearing the painting because she didn't like how it turned out, she got an A, but it still had a designer. She painted it and designed it, and then she also smeared the paint, okay? So she was actively involved in the creation of that work, even though it was an abstraction. So the point here from the teleological argument, the existence of God from design itself, is that all design implies a creator. Okay. Secondly, there is a grand designer behind the universe. There is a grand designer behind the universe. This universe is much more complicated and much more complex and much more beautiful than any painting, right? The painters just paint what they see. And as Plato said, he called art the lowest form of knowledge because it's the third remove from the thing. First, there would be the eternal forms. Then there would be the replicas of the eternal forms. And then an artist's rendition of the replicas of the original forms. So I don't think Plato was trying to be negative in calling art the lowest form of knowledge. The highest form of knowledge would be the eternal forms, which we would say as Christians are in the eternal realm that God made, that God created. So all design implies a creator. There is a grand designer behind the universe, and there must be a grand designer. Psalm 139 speaks of this in verses 13 through 14, and I'll encourage you to read that, about the heavens declare the glory of God. The heavens declare the glory of God. If you ever are having a night, and you just thinking about other things in your life and in your small world, right? What's going on? And then you go over to the window and you look up. It's a starry night. Or you go out on your porch and you look up and you see all those stars. Just sort of sets everything in perspective, doesn't it? That we are just so small and the universe is just so big and grand, but God still cares for us. He still cares for us. He sent his one and only Son for us to show us just how much he cares. Okay, so notice thirdly, the argument, we looked at the argument for the cosmos, the cosmological argument. We looked at the teleological argument, the argument from design, and thirdly, the argument for the existence of God from the moral law, which is called the axiological argument. The axiological argument. Here's how it goes, okay? Number one, all people are conscious of an objective moral law. All people are conscious of an objective moral law. Okay, we all know if you kill someone, you go to prison. If you steal something, you go to jail or you'll be prosecuted. How many times do you go into a dressing room at a department store and try a shirt on or a pair of pants, and you see a poster on the wall that says what? Shoplifters will be prosecuted, right? We all know that. So we know that all people are conscious of an objective moral law. That is what, for the most part, keeps a lot of us, a lot of people in line, right? That's why you're not going 100 miles an hour through a town that says 35, because you know if a policeman sees you, you're going to get a big ticket and probably lose your license and maybe even go to jail for a few days, okay? So we're all conscious of an objective moral law. Secondly, moral laws point to a moral lawgiver. We would not have moral laws if there were no ultimate moral lawgiver, right? Our city-state, our towns and cities would not be mapped out on grids, right, unless someone else did that. Where did that come from? It came from Greco-Roman culture, the Greeks and the Romans. And much of the way that our cities and aqueducts and all these things are designed come from Greco-Roman culture. So that was the model that we used. And so there is a moral law because there is a moral lawgiver. And then thirdly, there must be a supreme moral lawgiver if there is a moral law. So all people are conscious of an objective moral law. Moral laws point to a moral lawgiver, and there must be a supreme moral lawgiver. Immanuel Kant unfortunately insisted that there was no way to have absolute knowledge about God, partly because he got mixed up with some bad philosophy and he got trapped in his own philosophical system. And if you study much philosophy at all, secular philosophy, you'll find that people will get stuck in their own philosophical mousetrap and they can't get out, or their own philosophical maze and they can't get out. Not because the truth isn't there, because Jesus said, you will know the truth and the truth will set you free. There is truth. What happens is people buy into certain lies that don't enable them to find the truth. Does that make sense? They have certain biases that prevent them from taking steps in the right direction toward truth. And that's exactly what Immanuel Kant did. He insisted that there was no way to have absolute knowledge about God, and he rejected all of the traditional arguments for the existence of God. He did approve of the moral approach, not as proof, but as a way to prove that God is necessary for the moral life. Like other philosophers, Kant gets stuck in his own philosophical system. He did not believe you could prove God's existence, but he thinks God is necessary to live a moral life. Well, at least he got that much right. Okay, so notice number 4, and sort of last thing that we'll look at in this lecture today, arguments for God's existence from being. Remember what we said being was? Ontology, ontological, that's being. We have our being, so God has his being, and that is what enables us to be, to live, and to move, and have our being, okay? So perfection, Geisler says, that can be attributed to the most perfect being must be the most perfect being. Perfection that can be attributed to the most perfect being must be the most perfect being, or he would not be the most perfect being. Okay, so when you see the guy under the bridge that claims to be Jesus Christ, or someone on the street in New York City who's half out of their mind, and you see it all the time, unfortunately, and they say, maybe they bump into them and they may say to you, excuse me, and then they say they're God or something like that, and you know right away that's not God. Well, how do you know that? Because because we know God is perfect, right? We know God is not somebody crazy on the street, just running off with explicatives. And so perfection that can be attributed to the most perfect being must be the most perfect being, or he would not be the most perfect being. So when we read about God in the Holy Scriptures, we find that he is absolutely perfect. When the Jews read about God in the Tanakh in the Old Testament, they know that he is absolutely perfect, right? So we wouldn't attribute a sinful, fallen human being who says he's God with God, because we know that God's attributes, his characteristics are perfect, okay? So God's being, perfection that can be attributed to the most perfect being must be the most perfect being, or he would not be the most perfect being. Aren't you glad that God is perfect? Imagine if God were imperfect and he had the power that he does. He would be a cosmic tyrant. Imagine, right? We see this in our world. Leaders who have some power, but they're corrupt, and they use their power to create corruption and just to destroy things. So we know that God is not a tyrant, because God is good. God is perfect. And God is just. He's loving. He's righteous. He's all-knowing. He can be everywhere at once. And he's not like us. He doesn't sin. He doesn't hold grudges. He's perfect. So notice, secondly, necessary existence is a perfection which can be attributed to the most perfect being, and that's God. Necessary existence is a perfection which can be attributed to the most perfect being. Okay, so remember what we said. We are contingent beings. We are contingent upon God, who is necessary. If God were not there, we would not be there, because we need him, because he's necessary. We're contingent. Again, it's like your newborn child. They look at you as you are necessary. If you're not there, you can't feed them their bottle. You can't change their diaper. You can't protect them from harm. You can't put them in bed at night so that they can sleep and wake them up in the morning. Usually they don't need any help with that, right? But you see the point? Even in the parent-child relationship, you are the necessary being, and the child is contingent. They are dependent upon you. The same is true in creation. God is the necessary being. We are the contingent being. If God were not there, we wouldn't make it. So that's Geisler's point here, is that the necessary existence of God is a perfection which can be attributed to the most perfect being, and that's God. And notice one other thing he says here under ontology, under God's existence and being. Necessary existence must be attributed to the most perfect being, and that's God. Necessary existence must be attributed then to the most perfect being, and that is God. Geisler notes, if God exists, which we know he does, we conceive of him as a necessary being. By definition, a necessary being must exist and cannot not exist. Therefore, if God exists, then he must exist and cannot not exist. Okay, I'll say that again. You got to put your thinking cap on for this one. If God exists, and we know that he exists, we conceive of him as a necessary being. Again, we're dependent upon him. He's necessary. By definition, a necessary being must exist. By definition, a necessary being must exist and cannot not exist. Therefore, if God exists, then he must exist and cannot not exist. You see, men and women, if God did not exist, we wouldn't be here. Again, we would not be here. We would not be here. We would not have anything to eat. We wouldn't have anything to wear. We wouldn't be sheltered. We wouldn't be protected. I mean, there would be meteorites, things falling to the earth that would destroy us. God protects us in many different ways. God sustains us in many different ways, often things that we don't even think about. So God is the necessary being, and we are the contingent being. So I'm going to stop there in the interest of time, because I don't want these videos to go on too long, because maybe you won't watch them. I know it's something too long. People just tune it out. So let's close there, and we'll pick up the next time. We're going to move into a little bit more in this chapter. We're going to move into the next lecture, chapter 3, which is questions about other gods. Okay, so thanks for joining me. Again, this is Introduction to Christian Apologetics. This is from Norman Geisler's book, When Skeptics Ask. It is a basic philosophical and apologetics book giving a defense of the Judeo-Christian ethic and belief system. So thanks for joining me. God bless you. We'll see you next time.